Have you heard about Chinese spies being involved with local politics in California? There was a recent case of a campaign manager of a city council in LA. This campaign manager got indicted as an alleged spy for the Chinese Communist Party. Now, when it comes to the influence of Chinese Communist Party across California, there is a lot of that hasn't been covered much by the media. Today, we sit down with investigative journalist Joshua Phillip with Epochtimes, who has been investigating Chinese Communist Party's influence.
This is the biggest threat that America faces. This is a bigger threat than war. This is a bigger threat than Taiwan. This is a bigger threat than Russia, because it's in our own backyards. It's already here. It's already infiltrating our government. It's already controlling, or at least influencing, most major American businesses and most major American media, already as we speak. If we don't take this seriously, we are going to lose our country.
Collecting all this information, as you're saying, what are they trying to achieve?
The big picture is they're trying to take over our country without invading us through military force. They're invading us through non-military means.
Have you seen them monitoring like all the Chinese people that are
Yes.
here? All of them?
Yes, all of them.
Remember that the Chinese people are not the Chinese Communist Party, and the Chinese people have strong values and strong culture, and they're the victims of the Chinese Communist Party. And a lot of the issues we're going to be discussing in this interview, they are victims of first. I'm Siam Al-Karami. Welcome to California Insider. Josh, it's great to have you back. Welcome back.
Yeah, it's great being here. I love Southern California.
Josh, we want to talk to you about something that's happening in the politics of California, and this has been going on for a while. One of the examples that recently come up in the last 5-6 months has been Arcadia's city councilwoman, the campaign manager was a Chinese Communist Party spy. And China is having more and more influence from what we are gathering in California politics. But you have seen this existing for a long time. Can you tell us what you see? You're a China expert.
So what's happening in California with the city council member and someone tied with the administration working for the Chinese Communist Party, that's a very common thing you've seen. You've seen this in New York with government officials who've had like one person who was advising them or on their campaign who was, a Chinese Communist Party spy. It was very common for a long time in San Francisco, like on the surface, and I would say it's actually still happening, where you had, for example, Rose Pak, and Rose Pak was even deemed by a lot of the mainstream media as the kingmaker of San Francisco. You couldn't get into politics without her blessing, and she was tied in with the United Front, an overt branch of Chinese espionage, right? An overt branch of the Chinese Communist Party dedicated to subversion. So the Chinese Communist Party, the way it does spying and influence operations may not be, I'd say, is understandable to people when we think of conventional espionage. Because a lot of it takes place for like gray zone type stuff. They go in through the education system, they come in, here when they're students, they go to American universities, and there are different bodies at the universities that kind of groom them through their careers. You have, of course, we talked before about the CSSAs, the Chinese Student and Scholar Associations, last time I was on the show. That's students, scholars, faculty, and then, of course, the Chinese Communist Party's fingers and tentacles within the communities. Those individuals will then try to groom these students, and then place them in certain jobs. So if they need somebody to get involved in politics, they might have them apply to be an intern, for a major politician. And it's not hard to do that, especially when they're trying to be, diverse, and they want to bring in, more people and more voices and, more different cultures. And especially if they want to engage with China, maybe they have business deals or maybe their industries or let's say, for example, if you're in a state where a lot of the GDP is agriculture, and China's one of the
Which
biggest
is California
agriculture.
too, yeah.
Well, in California too. Or, big energy and green energy, for example. Of course, we get a lot of the green energy products from China. Maybe you want to have somebody who knows the culture, who knows the language.
So you hire somebody that's come from universities or interning.
Well, obviously, right? And especially when you're dealing with certain countries. Because certain countries, if you're a politician and you go and meet with a foreign representative, or you're trying to make a trade deal with another country, or Or you have one of your core businesses in your state or your community, and one of their biggest trading partners is with someone in another country. When you have meetings, it does help to have somebody who knows the culture, knows the language.
Especially with China, because such a complex is so different than the American culture.
And a lot of Westerners, a lot of people from the US know, even when they do learn Chinese, it's very hard to get a lot of the nuances and the subtleties within the language. And you'll always be regarded as a foreigner in their eyes. And so if you have someone who has that real core common ground with them, you view it as a foot in. The problem you have is the way the Chinese Communist Party knowingly, openly, and very strategically uses these kinds of people. So, for example, under the Chinese Communist Party's national security law, in fact, some recent changes they've made to it, if you're a Chinese citizen, and I'm not saying they're all spies, right? But if you're a Chinese citizen and the CCP asks you to do something, you do not have a choice. If the Chinese Communist Party asks you to serve China or to quote unquote remember that you are Chinese, which is the way they often say it, and that has suggestions and subtleties, right? It means you don't have a choice. If they want you to help the CCP, if they want you to do backroom deals with the CCP, if they want to use you to try to compromise somebody or help them get the deal, they will, and you don't have a choice. If you choose otherwise and you say, I'm not going to help you, you risk, of course, first off getting deported these days, which is a big issue. But they're going to threaten your family. They're going to end any possible future you had with having a career in any way tied to China. You're going to be cut off.
So even if you're in the U.S., you're interning, or you're like a student that is just got a job with a interesting, potentially having access to politicians, you will be monitored by China. How does that work?
You don't have a choice otherwise.
So you have to cooperate
especially if you have something they want. If you have something they want, and that could be access to a targeted individual like a major politician, that could be maybe you're the key figure who can help them push a business deal. Maybe you're the figure who can help them get into, maybe a major interview with a major American news outlet, and they can get, some big narrative pushed in American news. If they view you as the figure who can help make that happen, stealing or even just, friendly introduce me to this person, you don't have a choice, according to Chinese Communist Party law. And so you could say, well, what if it's a student, they come from China, they come to the US, and they plan on staying here, right? If they have family in China, the Chinese Communist Party will threaten, they'll first go to the family and say, hey, ask your son or daughter to help with this, help us try to convince them. Tell them it's a great opportunity, we'll help their family back in China, their family will get benefits, this is a great opportunity, why would you pass it up? And they might say, well, you're not really doing anything illegal, you're just helping us make friends. You're helping your country. And they might say something as simple as that. And that'll be the first layer of pressure. The second layer of pressure, if you refuse to do it, is they'll start threatening your family or threatening you. Well, look, if you want to come back to China, if you're working in the US, but if you want to come back to China one day, or you want to have a good future, maybe you want to get into business, and it's very hard to go to school. In China, they have college entrance exams. There's a lot of competition for the good universities. You have to jump through a lot of hoops to get a good university. And if you lose that, you're working 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. They call it the 996 schedule for the rest of your life in a factory, earning like Chinese minimum wage. Pick what future you want. You decide what future you want. Do you want that? Or do you want to have this big cushy life and your whole family's going to be happy and they're proud of you? All you got to do is maybe pass this politician a little baggie full of money, maybe help them get a meeting, maybe help invite them to China, help moderate this meeting with the Chinese Communist Party representative. This is the kind of pressure they put on you. If you continue to refuse, then it gets dangerous. Then they start threatening your family. Maybe your parents get, taken in for questioning by the local authorities. Maybe they pull your visa, and suddenly you're not legally allowed to be here anymore.
How would they pull your visa? Because the U.S. is in charge of your visa, right?
Well, on the Chinese side, for example, right?
Because you have to get a permission to come out? Is that?
Well, so from what I understand, I've talked to Chinese. If you come here, it's kind of on permission of the Chinese Communist Party. They can to an extent eliminate that. And they can base, for example, if you want to go back to China, you have to renew it and stuff. Even for Taiwanese, they have to go through the Chinese Communist Party's embassies. So they can't really, cancel your visa is the wrong way to say it, but they can kind of cancel your right to be here to an extent on the Chinese side. Maybe they can affect your passport, for example. They can start messing with you in different ways. Remember also, the Ministry of State Security had what's called Operation Fox Hunt. And that's kind of the more extreme end of it, where you're really not listening to them. They'll send agents of the Chinese Communist Party through the MSS, Ministry of State Security, to threaten you, threaten your family. They will try to make you self-deport. They'll try to force you to self-deport. In some cases, they're even telling people, commit suicide or we're going to hurt your family. And yet you had that happening. That's a known operation.
Is that happening right now?
Yes, absolutely. That was a known operation even during the Obama administration, happening on American soil. It was, again, called Operation Fox Hunt. And so that's when you get to the far end where you're a dissident, you're not listening to the CCP wants something from you. And remember, according to Chinese national security law, you don't have a choice. If you disobey, you're a dissident. And so, on that point, when you do see people, Chinese people speaking out against the CCP, when you do see them protesting, when you do see them taking strong actions, this is the risk they've taken upon themselves knowingly. They are knowingly ruining their ability to go home. They're knowingly putting themselves in harm's way. They're knowingly denying, what could have been a great career, great opportunities, because it goes against their principles. They understand the Chinese Communist Party is a murderous communist regime with ill intent against the United States. And they're not willing to harm the United States. They're not willing to sacrifice their values. They're not willing to go against their religion, and there are many who decide to go that route. But there are also many who decide to go the other route, serving the interests of the Chinese Communist Party, which is where you get these influence campaigns targeting politicians.
Are they monitored? Have you seen them monitoring all the Chinese people that are here?
Yes.
All of them?
Yes, all of them. So the CCP has a branch of its government dedicated to this type of monitoring. And it's been made a lot worse because of social media and AI. So a couple examples with this. The branch that monitors them is called the OCAO, the Overseas Chinese Affairs Office. It's like a sister branch tied in very heavily with the United Front. I've been told by many Chinese that if you see the government offices for this, it's the same door. It's the same place, basically.
In China, right?
In China. But a lot of the agents of the CCP, they'll oftentimes even have both titles, United Front and the Overseas Chinese Affairs Office. So you could say the United Front kind of builds the overseas networks, builds the networks of infiltration, builds the networks of Chinese spies, and so on. The Overseas Chinese Affairs Office maintains the databases. They maintain who is who are they friends with, where do they work, who are their family members, and so on. Because remember in China, they have the social credit system, right? Social credit system is a big data program tied in with every form of surveillance. Everything you look for on the internet, every purchase you make, every credit card purchase, because remember they have a digital currency there, a centralized bank digital currency, a CBDC. Every purchase you make, who are your friends, who are your family members, what do you believe? What's your religion? What is your family member's religion? What are your political beliefs? Do you believe in democracy? Do you support Hong Kong? Are you in line with the CCP? Do you oppose the CCP? All of this is documented, and you're actually given a score. Again, they call it the social credit system. You're given a social credit score based on whether you align with the interests of the CCP or deviate from them. So if you're a good citizen, you get all kinds of benefits. And I mean, you could actually say that you just enjoy normal relative freedom you know, even weird stuff. Like you get access to like a good citizen dating apps, for example. If you're on the bad citizen list, you can't use the bus system if you're on the lower end of it. There have been reports and videos even, homeless people in China sleeping in tunnels and so on. And those are the bad citizens. Those are the people who violated, the CCP's social credit laws. Maybe you believe in democracy. Maybe you criticized the CCP. Maybe you went and protested when people were talking about, there were runs on the bank in China. And what they were doing is they were turning their health codes red and arresting them and saying, you're violating COVID policy. But they were doing it to arrest protesters, right? They'll do that to you. Then you're on the naughty list. Once you're on the bad citizen list, your ability to make purchases is limited. Your ability to use public services is limited. Your ability to rent houses is limited. If anybody associates with you, you will, by extension, affect their social credit scores. So people don't want to be friends with you. Your family's not going to want to be close to you. It's like you're like radioactive. And so if you don't work with the CCP, you're that.
So they have a system similar to this here. It's not as aggressive as that, but they're still monitoring everyone.
And what a lot of people don't know, because stepping to the side a little bit, there's the debate around banning TikTok and whether TikTok was sending American data to China. A lot of tech companies, including social networks, sell private data to China. And you could say, well, they're not selling it to the Chinese government. They're selling it to Baidu, or they're selling it to
big Chinese companies.
Big Chinese companies, because there's no law blocking purchasing of data. When you download an app like a social network and you give it permission to take your data, a lot of these apps are free, quote unquote, but the product is you. The product is your data. It's what you're looking at. Again, your friend networks, your political beliefs, advertising data, and they sell it. Other countries buy it too. And so if a Chinese company buys it, well, under the Chinese Communist Party, all data needs to be secure and viewable by the Chinese Communist Party. So there's no such thing as data security in China. You don't have a choice.
You have to give it to the government, essentially.
You go out of business if you don't, and you probably go to jail if you don't. You will violate their cybersecurity laws if the CCP says, give us all your data, and you don't do it. And so back to the point of the Chinese Communist Party's social credit system. They're not just doing this to Americans, they're doing it globally. And when the CCP goes and tries to they build these infrastructure projects, they build internet infrastructure, they build smart city technology. It's part of the Belt and Road Initiative, going to Africa, going to Latin America, going to different parts of Asia. They also put in place these types of social control systems. There are many countries outside of China that actually have the social credit system. And the big data system is collecting data on everybody. Even biometric data, even like DNA, retina scan type stuff. Even, for example, it came out that some of the things you can use to check your ancestry, a lot of that DNA data was being processed through Chinese laboratories. It was a big controversy a few years ago. A lot of the COVID tests, the DNA data was being processed in China. And the concern, of course, is that the CCP has been collecting DNA data, even in addition to collecting everything else on everybody. So they have everything, basically.
So Josh, people wonder, them coming and having a spy as a campaign manager for a small city in LA and collecting all this information, as you're saying, what are they trying to achieve?
What the Chinese Communist Party wants to achieve is the control of foreign governments through non-military means. They want to puppeteer governments. The direct way of saying it is they want to take over the world. If you want me to just say it directly.
True, actually coming and influencing the government officials by using spies and then eventually taking over their policy making. Is that what you see?
Yeah, and so the blunt way of putting it is that. The politically correct way of saying it is that they want to have influence over over governments and policy.
Now, did you directly see this in your work when you've been investigating the Chinese Communist Party for many, many years in New York?
I've seen it everywhere. Because once you grasp how the mechanisms work, you can see how the same mechanisms are in place in every single state in the United States, every single county in the United States. You can see it at the federal level. You can see it in Canada. You can see it in Europe. You can see it in Africa and Latin America. I was in South Korea doing research a couple years back, and I investigated the Chinese influence operations there, and it's the exact same thing. It's the same thing in Australia. It's the same thing in Germany. It's the same thing in Italy.
So
it's
what
everywhere.
happened in San Francisco essentially can you explain how it worked with Rose Pak, how much influence?
Rose Pak was regarded again, and don't take my word for it, this was the label used by most mainstream media. She was called the kingmaker of San Francisco. You basically couldn't get elected in politics unless you had her blessing. Now, the way that works is this. If you want the Chinese vote, if you want the entire network of operations, the businesses with any Chinese interest, and a lot of them have Chinese interest, you need to go through the agent who has all those connections, and that was Rose Pak. Now, making a deal with Rose Pak was making a deal with the devil. You were selling out the United States to an extent. But
did people know that? The people that were dealing with, is it easy to know that, or is it?
I don't think they think far enough to understand the implications of it. Because let's put it this way. If I were to say Hollywood films cannot be made, for the most part, at least not getting to China, without co-producing with China, without agreeing to some Chinese censorship laws, without agreeing to implement some of the policies that the Chinese Communist Party has on representing core socialist values, with showing China in a positive light, without showing the U.S. military in a, you can't show the U.S. military in a positive light, you have shown in a negative light.
And those rules are there.
They're there. They're public. It's not even a secret. So that's accepted. This is known. This is not a secret. Hollywood reporters talked about it. I've written about it. Everybody's talked about it. If you have these, Silicon Valley, you're talking about, San Francisco, that whole area, let's talk about Silicon Valley. Huge, huge voting bloc, huge financial sector for San Francisco. How many big tech companies need the Chinese market? All of them? Are there any that don't? Even outside of China, if you want to do business in Latin America, there's a lot of kind of gray area stuff going on. If you're a tech company and you want to do business in China, you need to hand them your source code. You need to agree to certain types of Chinese Communist Party law. You need to agree to their data policies, where pretty much everything needs to be viewable and controllable by the CCP. On the more nefarious side, you'll even need to get involved in some of their more, let's say, criminal, what Americans would consider criminal activities, but when China would just be normal business. Like, you need to employ some of the children of the Communist Party leadership, for example. You need to give them key positions. You'll need to have a Communist Party cell operating in your company. And they'll just rename it in different ways. You need to allow the CCP a certain amount of access. And oftentimes you need to be engaged and knowingly be engaged to an extent that your technology might be used for nefarious purposes. Many big tech companies involved in surveillance, smart city programs involved in human rights abuses. If you're in the garment industry, you're knowingly engaging in slave labor in China, because most of the garment industry is tied with slave labor, especially slavery of Muslim Uyghurs. If you're involved in industries for even Halloween decorations, there have been a lot of reports coming out, including letters from Ma Xinjia, for example, about being involved in re-education through labor camps in China, using persecuted Falun Gong practitioners, people being tortured and persecuted in these horrible prisons, making these things. And so companies, they know they're getting involved with that, but they do it.
They kind of don't want to look at it. They don't want to think about it.
Well, it's ironic because they feel that they have the right to preach to us about, problems historically in America, but they don't have a problem getting engaged in the exact same activities, much worse, happening, as we speak. It's a real forked tongue type approach they have to business. They feel the right to give, this moral preaching to Americans about how bad we are, but the things they're engaged with right now is worse than any of that. And it's ridiculous when you think about it. It goes so against what we stand for as a country. And again, this is cognitive dissonance, where we can acknowledge something is bad, but they can also say, well, that's the way it is if I do it right now. I'd actually question how many people in the past may have said the exact same thing about things that we could regard as wrong. Hey, I was just doing my job. Hey, I was just following orders. That's just the way the society was. 20 years from now, is that what's going to be said, if you're standing judgment in front of a court? I don't think it works like that.